Hello everyone again. We are approaching the end of this dance day dedicated to two main key topics, right? The recovery on one side with its twin transition and cohesion policy on the other side. We have learned a lot on how moving from the old to the new world of the EU economic policy, and we learned that evaluation and evidence-based approaches should drive these transitions. We hope the workshop has been interesting and productive for all participants and speakers, as it has been for us organizers. And we now have our icing on the cake before the weekend starts for us all, with conclusions by Nicola De Michelis. Let me introduce Nicola, Director at the DG REGIO, where he is responsible for the smart and sustainable growth and program implementation unit of the European Commission. Nicola has a long-term consolidated experience with cohesion policy implementation in different member states and across different programming periods. We are excited to have him to conclude this day. So Nicola, thank you very much once again for being with us today. Please, the floor is yours.
Good evening to everybody, and thank you, Mara, for giving me the opportunity to share some reflections after this long day. These are very early days to draw a meaningful conclusion on how this new animal in town will actually operate, and we are all trying to anticipate how it will work and how it will interact with other policies, and notably with cohesion policy. But these are also extraordinary days, because nobody would have thought a year and a half ago that member states would have allowed the Commission to draw money on the financial markets to put together one of the biggest investment plans ever seen. And despite the fact, you can believe me, I need this initial disclaimer, that I have been working on cohesion policy for most of my career in the institution. I'm really curious to see what will happen over the next few years. And so what I would like to do in the next 10 minutes is to share with you some issues that, in my view, will need to be closely monitored to understand what the debate that will start in a couple of years on the future of the budgetary framework of the Union will look like. And I would suggest five topics that have been largely echoed in your discussion. The first is the old questions of milestone targets and reforms. By the way, targets and reforms that have been around in cohesion policy for some time. And with the ex-ante conditionalities, the target, the performance framework. And if there's one thing that they have shown is how difficult it is to construct these systems, and the perverse incentives that sometimes exist on the side of the partners in this discussion in setting those targets. And this obviously is particularly worrying or problematic in the world of the Recovery and Resilience Facility, where the disbursement of the money is linked to the fulfillment of those milestones and targets. Just think of the difficulty we had with the performance framework within cohesion policy. And this because, and we have participated, in fact, our colleagues that have negotiated the recovery plans with the member state have largely tapped on the experience of the structural funds director generals, which were obviously the only one that had a minimum of experience with investment. And yet, there is a gigantic asymmetry of information between the Commission and the member state. And this obviously has created a system that, well, we'll see. We'll see what the result will be, but it will be important, I think, to keep an eye on it. And the same on the question of the reforms. Vasilis explained it very nicely, I think, and it depends very much on at which level you set those reforms. The small reforms closely linked to the functioning of cohesion policy have the advantage of creating a system in which the reform is closely linked to the responsibility of the authorities that manage the funds and implement the reforms. Here we are in a world in which the distance between the reform and the investment is gigantic, and so how the actors will interact is something we need to look at. The second element is investment, because let's be very honest. In essence, the Recovery and Resilience Facility is a budgetary transfer, where, rightly so, the focus will be essentially, and the political focus will be on the reforms rather than on the investment, which means that, in a sense, we have a black box that somebody will have to open at a certain point in time to see what exactly is happening. Which also means that the all monitoring and evaluation of what is done with the money will be challenging, and in fact, there is a discussion in the Commission that the real test of the Recovery and the Resilience Facility will be the day the Court of Auditors will start looking into that black box, because somebody will want to see and will have to report on how the money has been used. The third point is the displacement effects that will occur over the next years, and we're already seeing it. There is a gigantic risk of overlaps between the different instruments. I will come in a second to the massive amount of money we are talking about, and we are already seeing delays in the way in which member states operate, which will bring me to the question of capacity, in the sense that what member states are doing are working in sequence. They have started by looking at the RRP, preparing the RRP, rightly so, big money, the new boy in town. But that means that the whole discussion on cohesion policy has been delayed, and we are now really starting to discussing the future programs, and we are at the end of the first year of the financial framework. And there will be an issue of coordination, of synergies, complementarities, however you want to call, on how member state will set up the mechanism to ensure that there are consistencies and interlinkages between the different instruments, and there will not be a sort of cannibalization of projects moving from one instrument to the other. And very honestly, what we are seeing in the programs, in the partnership agreements that we are now examining, is not particularly reassuring, in the sense that even in member states, there is a tendency to work in parallel, and the bridges between the two worlds is yet to be clarified and fixed. The fourth point is capacities, and this was a recurrent theme of the last session. As Mara was saying, I'm responsible for, among other things, for the implementation of cohesion policy in the south of Europe. And south of Europe happened to be the part of Europe that is at the same time a large beneficiary of cohesion policy and a gigantic beneficiary of the RRP. What we're talking about is a multiplication by a factor of 4 or 5 of the amount of investment that on average per year these member states will have to do compared to what they do last year with cohesion policy. They have to multiply by 4, by 5, the amount of projects, of investment, of money that they're able to use. So the challenge is enormous. And some of the mechanism and the priorities that the Commission has set, and rightly so, in the field of climate change, in the field of digitalization, are creating additional strain and tension in the way in which member states will have to operate. Just to give you an example, since Italy is very much at the center of the discussions today, in the framework of cohesion policy 14-20, the amount of resources dedicated to digitalization was around, if I remember correctly, $1 billion, $1.5 billion. With the combination of the 20% of the RRP dedicated to digitalization, plus a bit of digitalization that will certainly occur under Cohesion Policy 21-27, we are talking about investment in the order of 20 billion. 20 billion. And the 1.5 billion of the 1420 is yet to be spent. So this is just to give a sense of the challenge. And to address and manage that challenge, you need to have extremely strong and capable administration, which is not always the case. And I think that was Guido that said why it should be different this time around. And I tend to agree, it won't be different because the administration, national, regional, local, the beneficiaries that will manage these monies are the same, are exactly the same. And the question of capacity is not just by a question of hiring a lot of people in the administration, which is, I have the impression, is what is happening here and there. But it's, yes, of course, a question of quantities, but it's also a question of profiles, of quality. What type of profile do you need to bring in to manage the climate change and the digitalization transition? You do not need lawyer, probably. You need a specialist in circular economy, a specialist in ICTs. And it's about procedures, processes. This is, in fact, what is at the center of the conversation that we had and we continue to have in the context of cohesion policy with the managing authorities to try to build that capacity and strengthen that capacity. And it's not only about the public administration. In reality, most of the difficulties we have is with the final beneficiary, whether are the small and medium-sized enterprises, the local, the municipalities, the civil society organizations, or the agencies that in the end manage these resources. So how to deal with this and coherently between the two instruments, knowing that the question of capacity is at the center of both conversation is something, again, to look at very, very carefully. And the final point, which is probably a decisive one, at least for cohesion policy, is the question of the territorial dimension. This was raised also in the previous roundtable. And it's clear that we will need to see how, if at all, the resilience and recovery plan, with all the massive amount of money that will flow into some of these member states, will work in the same direction of Article 175 of the treaty that says that all instruments at national and EU level should work in the same direction of reducing disparities or not. Now, I heard people saying that who cares at the end of the day, what's really important are the reforms. But on the other hand, and again, to take the case of Italy, I don't want to discuss why cohesion policy didn't work in Italy, but one of the reasons it didn't work is because what national policy we're doing, we're moving in the other direction. And if you have a cohesion policy that is trying to compensate for all the other resources on the ground, it will be a difficult task. And this will clearly inform the discussion on the future of the policy and his rethinking. And obviously, as you can imagine, I'm of the views that the Commission, the European Commission, the Union in general, cannot afford abandoning the territorial dimension or the objective of reducing disparities. And it's sufficient to look at all the recent literature on the places left behind and the economy of discontent. And so to conclude, I think that we will collectively, we will need to monitor very closely what will happen over the next couple of years and be very creative in 2 years' time to think of a different cohesion policy, because I'm pretty convinced that the policy as we know it will have to adjust, will have to change, and how the lessons of the policy can help the recovery plan to operate effectively, and vice versa. What certainly good element of the recovery and resilience plan mechanics could be imported in the way in which the structural funds will function in the future. With this, thank you very much, Riccardo. Back to you, or Mara.
Thank you, Nicola, for your talk and your enlightening concluding remarks. Today we have covered a lot of ground across various areas and realms of EU policy. And Nicola, you have brought everything together in an incredibly effective manner. And I particularly liked your comment on because it has been a sort of recurrent theme of today's conversations, the issue of displacement effect that links also with the issue of coordination between the Recovery Fund and cohesion policy. And also very important what you mentioned about the delays that because of the need to program for the Recovery Fund, countries and regions across the Union are facing in thinking about their cohesion policy, and we are already in the first year of the programming period. So there are very big challenges ahead of us. Looking at these challenges, we really hope that this workshop has stimulated researchers, PhD students, I see many of them connected, evaluators, practitioners, and policymakers alike, to reflect and investigate old and new challenges associated with the digital and green transitions and their consequences across social groups, income groups, and territories. What we have learned today very clearly is that the social and political challenges from climate change and the digital revolution are really upon us. And we need to deal with them through bold and effective policies that work on the ground. So impact is the key point here. And as we have shown with extensive evidence, this content is not counterbalanced, cannot be fought with money, but needs to be addressed with impact. It's only when people see impact then they change their mind, that they become supportive of the process of European integration. And this comes very clearly when you run a proper analysis, for example, looking at the Brexit vote. So it's crucially important that we take these challenges heads on and we address them with policies that work. And we have discussed today extensively how important is understanding what works and what doesn't, using evaluation as a tool to learn from 50 years of experience of cohesion policy. This really needs to be taken on board if we want the enormous, unprecedented magnitude of the Recovery Fund to deliver the expected benefits. So building the knowledge base, building the evidence in this area is a key task for the years to come. And we hope this workshop has contributed to this. We hope to keep this debate alive with all participants and speakers. Video recording of all sessions will be available shortly. A position paper summarizing the key messages of all sessions will be produced and disseminated. And finally, let me close this day with an invite. So we really hope to reconvene all of you in person in 18 months from now for a new event on the same or a similar topic to discuss the new academic evidence that hopefully will be developed on digital and green transitions, as well as the state of affairs of the implementation of the Recovery Fund and the Recovery Plan 18 months into its implementation, when the midterm review of the current cohesion policy programming period will be approached. This is expected to take place in 2024, and also the debate on the next programming period after post 2027 will be taking off. So this will be a very important moment really to take stock for both the Recovery Fund and cohesion policy. And so we really hope to be able to reconvene you all that time in person, either in Rome or in London, to be able to discuss these important issues while keeping the conversation alive online on our publications with short articles on our blogs in the time being. So let me thank you, Nicola, once again for being with us today and for offering this incredibly helpful conclusive remark. Let me thank you all, speakers and participants, for being with us today. Has been an incredibly productive and interesting day, and let me wish you a nice and relaxing weekend. It's really deserved now. Thank you.